Hey everybody, I'm Georgia Weedman, author of Penetration Testing, a hands-on introduction to hacking, and your instructor for this accompanying lab. So today we're going to take a look at port scanning, TCP ports, and there's two TCP port exercises, and then we're going to look at UDP. So TCP stands for Transmission Control Protocol, something you will probably have to remember to take a test and then look up for the rest of your life, like most things. And TCP is connection based. It's just one of the two main ways that our computers are going to talk to each other over the network. Not everything that you're going to attack certainly is going to be listening on a port. You think of, say, for instance, a web browser. That doesn't listen on a network port. It doesn't need to. It just browses the internet. That would be weird if it did listen on a port, and probably a security issue. And certainly you can attack web browsers and all sorts of other things that are not listening on ports. But things that are listening on ports, like mail servers or file transfer servers or anything like that, we'll run into a few different things here as examples. Those are things that we can attack directly over the network, and we don't need user interaction. We don't need them to browse to a page or open a file, and we can just, if we're on the same network with them, or it's a box that's on the internet, like it's running a web server, for instance, that typically runs on TCP port 80, and we can attack that directly. I mean, that's awesome from an attacker standpoint, right? Not having to have the user involved. So, we will take a look at TCP here. We'll see UDP, user datagram protocol, in a couple exercises as well. So, typical, turn on your lab, grab your lab manual, and, let's take a look at what flags we need to get. That's always nice. How many services are running on the target machine, and what is the version of VS-FTPD server? Okay, fair enough. And so, if we go over, start up your lab, come over here. Remember, IP addresses, yours is going to be different than mine. Mine is 192.195.253.2. So as usual, it says in the information, our target is going to be .3. So yours will be different than mine, most likely. So if yours is not working, again, that is the number one reason why things don't work, is we get our IP addresses wrong. So be sure and check the IP address in your lab if yours is not working. All right, so we want to get to know this guy, this target that we're after. So first of all, let me just clear this out. And let's start with a tool called Netcat. Netcat is it's called the Swiss Army knife of TCP IP, and it does a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot you can do with it. We're just going to look at, a very basic example here. You can use it, in exploitation, even in post-exploitation. So it's definitely a tool worth getting to know. It's got a -H flag for help, like a lot of them do. It also has a man page. It also is aliased as NC for Netcat. So you can just, instead of typing it out, you can also just say NC, Q to get out of man pages. So we can use Netcat to connect to ports. That's one of the many things it can do, is connect to a port. So if we wanted to see if a certain port was open, and there's lots of ports, so 65535, I always fail to remember that. I always get the numbers backwards. You guys have probably noticed I'm a little, at least, number dyslexic. And I love that you guys tolerate me for it. But anyway, there's 65,000 and some odd ports for TCP and for UDP. So it's just something that doing this manually maybe would not be the best use of our time ever, but say if we want to connect to a particular port. Well, I'll cheat a little bit, and it says, in the flags, it says what version of VS-FTPD, that has FTP in it, file transfer protocol, probably. So my guess would be there's something running on TCP port 21, just because that's where it typically runs, FTP. I always say, if I was a system administrator, I would just put everything on non-standard ports just to mess with the pen testers, which is, see, I'm already getting it wrong because I need my actual IP address. And let me just copy that guy. I always just go on autopilot. 192.168. That's always what it is, right? No, except not now. That's what it is on your typical home network. Anyway, all right, NC or type out Netcat. Let's do -V for verbose. Just tell it to spit out additional information. Verbosity is always good. And remember, if we're .2, then the target is .3, like it said, and then you just need the port. And so, remember I said there's probably something listening on 21 just because the flags told me so. Sure enough, it looks like there is. So we get netcat connected, and it says 2020 VSFTPD 3.0.3, so that might actually be the answer. Who knows? It's always nice when services like just come out and say, hey, I'm so-and-so. Please attack me. I find that very helpful. That's another thing. If I was a system administrator, I would change all the banners to be vulnerable versions, even though they weren't vulnerable. But actually, if I was a system administrator, I would be really busy trying to keep the network secure. I wouldn't have time to mess with the pen testers, but it's still a joke I always tell. Anyway, all right, so we can Control-C to get out of that. And so it looks like port 21 is open. It is listening. It looks like we've got some software listening there that we might be able to attack. But if, say, we went after, say, port 19, it says connection refused, so it looks like there's not anything listening on TCP port 19. I mentioned, 65535, 65,000 and some odd ports. That's, for us to go through this one by one, that's a lot. So obviously, computers are really good at repetitive tasks. So it's kind of something perhaps we should make the computer do for us, as opposed to going through the ports one by one looking for, open ports. So we could write a script, certainly. If you guys have any scripting skills, you could certainly script out netcat to run through all the ports and try. There's even flags that you could have netcat use, through the help that, might make that easier. But there's also, since port scanning is something that we do so much, there's tools that you can use that are specifically designed for port scanning, whereas Nmap is... Well, I just said Nmap. Whereas netcat, here we go. Netcat is more of a, catch-all suite of TCP IP connectivity. So it's not specifically designed for port scanning, but as I gave the game away a little bit, Nmap, the other tool we're going to look at, is actually designed for port scanning. Nmap has been around for a long time. It's really grown into being able to do a whole lot of stuff. You'll see, like the Nmap scripting engine as we go on through the course, but, its core principle has always been, it's, I guess, the de facto port scanner. So Nmap, I guess short for network mapper, that would be my guess. I probably should have looked it up before I shot this video. Anyway, so Nmap, and, we need, God, there's whole books about Nmap. You can do, there's a whole chapter on all the different ways you can do host specification. There's tons of them. You can have it read from a file, do a range, do a /24 net mask, all different sorts of stuff. It'll do DNS resolution. There's all different things you can do. We're just going after one particular target here, so it's actually pretty simple. We can just do Nmap and then give it the host IP address and let it go for the default scan. There's lots of different Nmap scans. We'll look at another one here. We'll look at additional ones as we do additional port scanning exercises, but there's totally a lot of them. Some of them you'll probably never use, but you might see come up on a test. There's the Christmas tree scan where you light up all the bits and like it's a Christmas tree, which I have only ever encountered in modern life as a test question. Christmas tree scan is real. All right, so I let that run, and it looks like we came up. So this is just a default Nmap scan, so it's just going to connect to the ports. It's not going to do anything additional at this point. I would have to tell it to do more things if I wanted it to do more things. And so it's just a default connection. So it found that port 21, which we already saw for FTP. At this point, it's kind of guessing about the services based on what typically runs on that port. And it's, as we'll actually see, that it is possible to run things on non-standard ports. So, it may, in some cases, even say service unknown, or the guess might be wrong. It's totally possible that you could put things on different ports. Security through obscurity, it's questionable whether it actually provides you any security value. And certainly on any test, you'd probably have to say it's security through obscurity and it's bad. But, it is what it is, I guess. Whatever makes it harder for the attacker to find you is valid in my book, because typically a lot of the attackers are just going to go after the easiest target. So you don't have to be 100% secure, because nobody is, right? We're all insecure. Oh, don't get me started down that path. Oh, we'll be here all day, and you guys just want to do a lab, and I'm going to give you a lecture about the state of security. All right, anyway. But the main point being, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun your friend who's next to you, because the bear will catch him. So in a lot of ways, security is the same way. Anyway, so we've got port 21, which is typically FTP, 22, typically SSH, 25, typically simple mail transfer protocol, so email, and port 80, typically HTTP, so a web server. So pretty cool, huh? If we wanted to know additional information, we could, at that point, we could use Netcat to connect to them. Like, you can actually do multiple Vs to make it even more verbose. Apparently, I can't say verbose today. And, we could connect to these guys and say, port 22. And because I made it really verbose, now it's sending me, like, things about certificate authorities and whatnot. So SSH, secure shell, so it's trying to be secure. It looks like, we've got on here SSH, open SSH, 7.6p1 Ubuntu, so maybe the target's Ubuntu. That's always nice to know. Get the operating system just from asking it. I mean, it could be wrong, like I said. Never entirely believe anything a computer says to you, but, we may have just found out the operating system of the target. That's always nice. And, if we can also interact with the systems. Q is not for this one. We can interact with them, like if we know the way to talk to the different protocols. Let's see. It said simple mail transfer. I did .2. You got to change it to .3. I think that's how you talk to simple mail transfer protocol. If you haven't figured it out, I'm very much the kind of person who doesn't store things in my head. I store it in Google. Okay, that is actually how you talk to it, but you have to tell it the host name as well. So, the main point being, you can netcat to any of the open ports, and you can talk to them if you know the correct syntax to talk to them. Different things are going to talk differently. Like FTP, I think it's user and then pass. Yeah, Google is fun. Anyway, so yeah, you can talk to the different ports that are open. A last thing before we end this one, I do want to show you, so you can do different, so I said that was the default in-map scan. There we go. The typing goes down. So a default in-map scan. So you can also specify different scans. I mentioned one, kind of as a joke, the Christmas tree scan, but there is a version scan. So what this is going to do is try to fingerprint the service. So it's going to try and figure out, instead of just saying FTP, it's going to say, it's going to make its best guess. I mean, we've seen a couple of them kind of show off their banners and it's like, this is who I am. So in that case, it's pretty good indication that that's actually what it is. And let's let that run. So this is going to, try and figure out what the services actually are. So that'll give us additional information. So this does take a little bit longer. You'll notice it didn't go quite as fast. So it looks like port 21, very secure FTP 3.0.3. We've got Apache HTTPD 2.4.25. That also says it's Ubuntu. And it says service info host Linux. So my guess would be, since two of the services think that it's Ubuntu, that it's probably Ubuntu is the target. But like I said, don't take anything as fact. But it's likely, I would say based on this, it's very likely that we only need to be focusing on things that are Linux based. And, we've got a couple of, 4. I guess the answer is 4, since it asked how many services there were listening. It looks like 4 and 3.0.3 as very secure FTPD's version. Look like those would be our answers, but we've got specific services we can start looking for potential vulnerabilities in. Google is certainly your friend. We'll do that as we move on through the course. I'm kind of jumping the gun here. We have 3 more lessons in port scanning first, but just based on this, we can start looking for potential vulnerabilities in these services that we might be able to exploit as we go on through the course. So anyway, that's a little introduction to port scanning. Thank you guys for your time, and I will see you next time.